All right, so theoretically, we're live. um, so, hi everybody. I'm Gerol, and I am talking with you for the next little bit about what I have termed conversational computing. This is something I made up. Other people probably made it up too before me. I didn't Google it before I used the phrase, but I also didn't lift it either. But it's my way of thinking about genAI, etc. At this stage. And I came to this out of my particular lens in the tech world. I am an academic technology consultant at a small liberal arts college, that one. Um, and what I do is essentially support faculty in their use of technology, however they want to use it. Whatever they need, I'm there to get it to them. Whatever they want to know about technology, I am there to help them know it. And that encompasses a big part of my job responsibilities and the space I occupy in the tech world. So I am really interested in the user experience. A very specific, well-defined set of users, for sure, but generally speaking, the user experience is the thing that I get excited about. So a little bit about myself. Who's this speaker and why should you be listening instead of going somewhere and, enjoying the sunshine? I started in philosophy. So congratulations, those of you in the room, if you went to the keynote and this session, congrats, you have come to a tech conference and you have sat through 2 sessions by philosophers.
We haven't sat for it yet.
Fair enough. I was making assumptions. But I started in ancient Greek philosophy, specifically ethics. That was sort of where I built my chops. Then I moved into the technology space, user support, faculty training and workshops, developing online teaching certification program for faculty that served them in really good stead in 2020-ish or so. In 2018, I was one of a large group of people that contributed something to this ethically aligned design version 2 project that the IEEE put out, sort of ethical thinking about how to design AI. This was 2018 again, so do the timeline. And I've been active in Berkshire County, which is the west end of the state, in case you didn't know that. Far west end of the state, far western Mass, and involved in programs like the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, giving classes in the community around ethics of AI. So that's sort of, you have a very good sense of my intellectual and professional space and where I'm coming from. Okay, now about this talk. 4 essential parts. First, I'm going to talk about a basket of related concepts, sort of out of the humanities side of things. So I'm really keen on sharing this idea of folkways, which folks may or may not be aware of. I'm really keen on just putting that in context of HCI, human-computer interactions, and a little bit of cognition sprinkled in. Then I'm going to move to the non-theoretical, right? I have been doing this type of work that I described since 2010. So, and the past 2 years, obviously, I have been doing a lot of work with faculty, specifically around workshops and training and thinking critically about generative AI and its uses, et cetera. So that sort of basket of experience, professional experience, I want to walk through and just identify some patterns that I think I've noticed in terms of user assumptions that have made a difference in the ways that I then turn around and talk about the technology in ways that make sense to them and help them understand the risks, the benefits, the ways to use, et cetera. Hopefully that this third bullet point throughout, either silently in your own minds or even potentially verbally out loud, I don't care. But I hope that you're sort of looking and hearing what I'm saying and thinking about, oh, yes, I've seen that too. I have noticed such a pattern, or that corresponds to something I've seen, or that's ridiculous, I've seen the exact opposite. That kind of sort of interaction and reflection is what I hope happens concurrently to my stepping through the slides. And then finally, in the traditional Q&A portion, I hope what we have a little bit of a conversation about is just addressing what are the implications of all of this, if any, for those of us in the room who do this type of work, namely who are front-facing, who are helping other people, non-specialists, non-technical people, to use this particular type of technology in meaningful, good, effective ways, etc. Just curiosity, how many people, are there people in the room other than myself who do that general type of work in terms of like supporting end users? Or am I more or less it? Okay.
I used to.
Yes, thank you. That counts. All right, so I got a few of my people in the room. This is good. For the rest of you, I don't know why you're here, but yeah, I'm glad you are. All right, so let's take a look. So this notion of folkways that I referred to. Anybody who's taken a sociology class in your life, you may already be well familiar with this idea. So this gentleman who is pictured on the slide is William Graham Sumner, very often sort of identified as the first sociologist. Anyway, the first person in the United States who held a post that was specifically labeled as a sociologist. But he did a great deal of work across many fields, not just sociology, but he introduced this concept of folkways in one of his seminal books that he wrote. And this refers to simply everyday norms, okay? Our habits, the things that shape our behavior. And the interesting thing about folkways is that they're not formal, right? Folkways are habitual, they arise over time. They are not the sorts of things that are articulated in laws or rules or regulations, okay? So you might think, oh, driving on the right side of the road. No, that's not a folkway, okay? That's a law that is written down somewhere and explicit. Folkways are more like, the sorts of things that sometimes used to get lumped in together with etiquette, I suppose, right? So things like, left or right, which side of the plate do you expect to see a fork on? Left, yeah, well, I guess it depends, right? But I mean, for a lot of us, you might say, oh, the left-hand side? I don't know. But the interesting thing, okay, is folkways actually, they may seem trivial because the example I gave was fairly trivial, but in general, folkways are identified as something that's pretty important in terms of shaping our institutions, particularly our cultural institutions, and our belief systems as well, okay? And the last important thing to know about folkways is that they are slow to change. All right, they don't turn on a dime. They have some institutional inertia, social inertia. And so what they end up providing, one of the reasons they stick around is that they provide some kind of stability, social stability for us, for better and for worse. Okay. All right, so that is, my intro sociology professor would be horrified that was all I was going to say about folkways, but that's enough to get us going where we want to go today. So just taking that and putting it in context, as I said, of human-computer interactions, right? This whole field, HCI, folks I'm sure already know. Enough about that. It's the dedicated field where we pay really close attention to the patterns of the ways humans perceive, the inferences that we make about what we perceive, the assumptions that we make about the functionality of different pieces, whether it's a device or an app, and then, the patterns that help and hinder, introduce friction or remove friction in terms of accomplishing whatever the user's goal is, okay? A lot of that has to do with psychology. A lot of that has to do with cognition, the way that human brains work. All right, enough. So I talked about the big part of, at least in terms of time, the biggest part of this talk is laying out patterns of assumptions that I have seen during my 12-ish years of working with faculty technology users in general, and 2-ish years roughly of working with faculty users around generative AI technologies in particular. And I just had to share this image because it spoke to my heart. I was born in 1978. This is very much like, yes, the nostalgia. But this is just sort of a little visual marker to remind us all of the obvious thing. Namely, that the ways, these kids are, this is 2005. How old do you imagine those kids are? I'm really bad at ages. 8 or so? Okay. So these kids were born in 1997. The assumptions that they would have had about what is a computer, what is a personal computer, what is it capable of, really important, right? Given that they are now, however old, not 2007, 24, okay, so 27-year-old adults in the working world with childhood assumptions about the ways technologies work and what it's capable of. All right. When I started doing this work, this was 2011 or so, and so Yeah, I've worked with folks fresh out of grad school, so late 20s, let's say, all the way up to folks that were in their early 80s, right? And generational assumptions. It doesn't pay to make grandiose generalizations, but there are interesting, as I like to say, patterns. So let's look at some of them. And again, this is where we start getting into things that I've seen. Think about whether you've seen them too. Assumptions about scope. All right, we're going to start there. So I'm articulating the sort of user assumption in each case in a way that sort of, I think, captures it in most clear language. So users often talk with me and bring an assumption to the table that a device or app has a defined set of functions or actions that it is designed to and will perform. I have here a screenshot of Microsoft Paint and a spreadsheet application. Okay, this is pretty deeply ingrained, right? It's pretty common that most users are going to obviously, what app do I use for this thing versus this other thing? All right, you don't expect an all-purpose app, right? People don't generally come to that. Maybe that's changing. All right, so one of the really interesting things I took away from the keynote was sort of this reflection about the sort of long-term changes of the ways that the technologies that we are building reflect our cultural assumptions and the ways that we see ourselves, and the openness and interrelatedness of the web as an idiom. Okay, I'm bracketing that because, again, I'm not making a theoretical case. I am identifying things that I have seen with the people that I have worked with over time, and this is definitely one of them. All right. And so the sorts of things that they may say are, oh, it's a chatbot. All right, I can classify this ChatGPT thing. I understand what type of app this is. Boom, check. Okay, good. That's important to me. It's like Google, but better. So I'm making an analogy to an app that I am already familiar with, whose functionality I understand, whose scope of what I can ask it for I understand, and that helps me to understand this technology as well. And, well, it may be able to do whatever you say, but it won't ever do this other thing. And I include that sort of response under the scope category as well, because I think it's getting at something important. It's someone sort of trying to fix the boundaries, right? To try and get a grasp on what this thing is and what it means. All right, so scope, I think, is one sort of important theoretical assumption that people will tacitly bring into the conversation around these things. Precision is another, all right? And so you can express the assumption like, well, a device or application accepts precise inputs and returns precise results. And again, we know that this is a massive and unhelpful oversimplification, all right, at this point in time. But nevertheless, it is something that we encounter when we are working with folks that, don't do technology as their bread and butter. Right, who are looking to engage with the technology based upon, some kind of minimal, what's the word I want? Atmospheric experience, if you will, right? People are atmospherically exposed to technology everywhere, but that does not imply much in terms of what they understand about the technology, right? And this seems to be a big one, right? There's this background assumption, unstated, which is why it's hard to tease out, that precision is what computers do. It's not an unreasonable sort of statement for a user to make, but it's important to sort of challenge, for sure. How do I talk to it? All right, I think that's a question that I've definitely heard, from folks really just stepping their toes in. What happens if I give it the wrong direction, right? Is it going to throw me an error? Is ChatGPT going to throw an error message? Like, no, it's okay. De-stress. And how does it know what I want? I mean, that kind of question can get classified into multiple categories, but I put it here under precision because, they're trying to get it. Well, what are the parameters, right? If they could use some more precise terminology themselves, the user might say, what are the parameters for interacting with this technology? They want to know. Talk to it. And how can I get a result that's more this than that? All right. So a lot of this prompt engineering stuff is a whole concept for people. I'm sure we'll talk about that at some point. All right. Replicability is another assumption that a lot of users I see bringing to the table, right? And specifically, the assumption is that a device or application, when given identical inputs, will return identical outputs. And this is possibly the one that just blows people's minds out of the water with regards to ChatGPT and its ilk. Okay, is just the non-replicability of what you input and what the output is. Right, and in an academic context, as I have positioned myself, I hear a lot of this versions of this question. Why can't I just use plagiarism detection software to see if my students are using it? And that's, the short answer is, of course, because such software does not exist at the moment that actually works in any meaningful way, to not even get into the issues of bias. But the deeper, more complicated answer is usually we're not usually ready to get into that quite yet, right? Talking with an end user, because you have to dive deep into the question of why is this application not replicable, right? Why is there not a one-to-one correspondence between input and output, which is what we have always assumed about computers? Why is it giving me a different answer now than yesterday? Variations on a theme, I think. All right, this one very much more in the conversation in tech circles as well as on the user side, but it's in both spaces, right? That devices and apps are fully explainable and interpretable by somebody. Even if not necessarily me, the end user, or me, the person helping the end user, there is a human being, there is at least one human being somewhere on Earth who can explain what is going on in here, all right? Even if it is only the person who built the thing. Deep, deep assumption. Deeply, deeply problematic, as I don't need to tell folks in this room. All right, it is deeply challenging to make sense of what it means if no human person can fully, transparently explain what is happening at every step. But how is it so fluent? All right, it's all just prediction, so why can't we just predict the next word, right? Why can't a human sit down with a pencil and paper and, do the probabilities? I took statistics. Why does ChatGPT do math better when you tell it to start its response with the words captain's log, star date? True, by the way. Link to the research if you didn't already know about it. I've got a bibliography slide at the back end of this thing. There are important limits to the explainability of what exactly is happening at any given stage. And that really matters psychologically, right? That matters for lots of reasons, but again, from the user experience support kind of angle. If somebody is coming to me and putting themselves in a vulnerable position, right, and saying, hey, I need help with technology, I need help with this technology, explain something to me that I don't already understand. Why is it doing this? It is a real challenge to navigate around the fact that I have to honestly say, I cannot tell you a fully satisfactory answer as to why this thing is doing this thing, right? There's a sense of, am I undercutting my own authority? Are they going to trust that I can actually help them now? Are they going to trust what I say about technology going forward if I just say, hey, I don't know, it just works. What can I say? All right. So again, psychology. Whoop. There we go. Okay. This one is sort of the easy get. There's an assumption about the logicalness of technology, right? And that an application operates fully and perceivably in accordance with the principles of deductive logic. Computers can't be creative, right? So lots of these sort of superficial reaction to conversation about the more creative applications of generative AI, your Adobe Firefly, all of the video generation ones, music generation, etc. Right? Again, don't have enough time today to talk about the real substantial ethical conversations around generative AI and creative artworks. That is a whole separate and important conversation. Not giving it short shrift, just don't have the time or the expertise today. derivativeness, all right, of what it outputs. Okay, so the real question about is it meaningful, right? Is it substantially meaningful to talk about an original work that is authored by AI in some way, right? Or is that just simply a meaningless concept? All right. Next. Here's a really interesting assumption that a lot of users will bring. That good functionality requires good data underneath it, all right? That if an application is going to function well, it's going to function better when there is good data, however defined, which is feeding it, if you like, okay? So again, this is sort of a folkway. This is an end user's conception from their own lived experience, from what they have used PCs in the past. If there is bad data, right, if there is misinformation, false statements, bad equations, right, however they conceive of this, right, the app is not going to work. If there is a flaw, right, in the code, then the app will not work. That just stands to reason, okay? But it's fascinating, of course, given that the first generation and up until the current generations of generative AI, most of them are not doing any sort of I take that back. That's an overstatement. Most of the data sets that have gone into the early generations of genAI, of course, are just simply to some degree scraped and dumped, right? It would have been incredibly time and labor intensive to clean the data set before, spitting out, GPT-2, for example, right? Not that people aren't doing it and haven't been and will continue to do it and find better and more efficient ways of doing that. But the fact remains that it has been demonstrated that these tools do amazing things and valuable things, even based on simply dumped data. So, and that is deeply counterintuitive to a lot of users. All right? No wonder it hallucinates. It was trained on the internet. But genAI can't fill in the blank, right? These important sort of strictly factual things where truth matters, okay? The last two slides, I don't have nice user quotations or fake user quotations to illustrate them because to me they're a bit more conceptual. But I think they're important to recognize as well. All right, so I think that a lot of users, from what I've seen, bring to the table what I'm labeling as Booleanism. I could have said, binary logicism, but that didn't quite have the same, ring. But it's this assumption that if the output, either the output of an app is evaluable as true or false, or at least it is the result, the output is the result of some finite chain of operations, which are themselves in turn based upon true and false operators. Again, it's a tacit assumption. I'm probably, you can tell me that I'm inferring more than is probably warranted. I'm open to that critique, but I think it's there. I think that that's a pattern that I sort of see underlying some of the reactions that people will have, right? Which is why, for example, I feel like there are a lot of folks who really struggle conceptualizing the sort of probabilistic inferences that are the way that we talk about the process of how genAI works. And this is the last one, and again, a bit more theoretical, but I think an assumption of relative simplicity, by which I mean that an app operates on a vastly oversimplified model of reality in whatever context we're talking about, right? So essentially, it's not possible for a computer to fully replicate the entire complexity of whatever system it is that you're caring about. A financial system, a social system, whatever, again, context changes. But the idea is that there's some essential simplification that happens, right, when you try to map messy reality into an algorithm, right, within the operating parameters of your device. All right? And I think, again, there is truth to this, right? There continues to be. But I think that the balance of this may be where the shifting is happening with a lot of users, because that's why I threw in there the parenthetical relative, all right? Because I think that the balance of the full complexity of reality and the complexity of what's happening with genAI, I think that ratio may be what's interestingly shifting at this point, that users are picking up on perhaps a little bit, right? That actually, it seems like genAI is doing much more complex things with many more parameters and many more dimensions, as the keynote speaker mentioned, right? And we are struggling in some ways to recognize what that implies. All right, so I originally called this a bibliography slide. It's not a true bibliography. It's cool things to read. There's so many more out there. But this first one, the Battle and Gallipoli, are that's the study that did the captain's log effect, and others as well. But yeah, I think. Oh yeah, and the final one is the sort of seminal work by Sumner on folkways, if that's something that's of interest to anybody. So, that having been said, I will give folks a minute to snap that photo if they want it, and then we will switch gears and enter the final phase of the talk, which is time for cues. Or conversations or pushback. A colleague of mine always wraps up talks by saying questions, comments, pushback. So I like that. I'm going to steal it. So questions, comments, pushback. Tell me about what you've seen and experienced.
So just the two things that you had sort of said at the end there that I think are kind of related. And I just wanted to gauge, because you were working with people and their perspectives are changing over time, is as AI, generative AI, becomes more commonplace, do you find that people are, you had sort of said that people are looking at it less of a simple app sort of a thing developed by people, something that is coming to these conclusions in a sort of intuitive way. As people are seeing it as more of the black box that we are sort of understanding it to be, is there also sort of a narrowing in the gap in terms of, you had said it as explainability, interpretability, like are people more willing to say, all right, it seems very complex and I'm not expecting you to be able to explain it wholly? Or is there sort of that, well, it's still an app and you being a person that understands apps should be able to explain it, even though I recognize it's very complex?
I think my first response is to that tension is huge and ongoing. But I do think I am noticing some shift. And again, I think that the trend does predate genAI specifically, right? I do think that folks who grew up, sort of with the Web 2.0 era, right? I think that they've probably begun absorbing some importantly different assumptions about technology based on, as a child growing up with an iPhone, that's in a way that when I was in elementary school, I sat down twice a week in the computer lab and learned BASIC and Logo, right? And sort of it was presented to me as, yes, this is a well-defined closed system of language. There are clear boundaries, there are clear inputs and outputs. The clarity, the conceptual clarity, I don't think that represents the experience of folks growing up since then, right? And so, yes, I do think the gap is narrowing. Slowly, again, because that's the nature of folkways, right? Even though technologies are accelerating, humans don't accelerate quite so quickly, right? And so, I think that's part of why, we're likely to see some jarring mismatches over time, potentially, right? Where if the rate of acceleration of the technology is not the same as the rate of acceleration of our understanding of the technology, there are certain gaps that may run the risk of widening in situations like that. But I do think, I think that my sort of snapshot is precisely that, And if I come back next year and give a update talk, I expect to be able to say some different things. Thanks.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just kind of interesting in itself about the one about the it can do this, but it can't do this.
Uh-huh.
The speed of movement is one of these things too. Like before, it's like if you talk about images, it can't even do hands at all. It's
Yes.
like, most of the time we can do hands now.
Yes,
Depending what
yes.
it's doing with the hands.
We've come a long way from Will Smith eating spaghetti, right, in a short amount of time. Yeah.
Will Smith can't redeem himself. For
Well, and I think that makes it really challenging, purely from a pragmatic perspective in the kind of work I do. Like, I want to be able to design workshops. I want to be able to develop guides, right, materials. And it's like, yeah, okay, so am I going to spend X amount of hours developing something that is probably next week no longer going to be accurate? Like, stop. No. Yeah.
I wonder if you've been doing this long enough that you might have seen this with something before. Like I'm thinking about when I was a kid, hearing people talk about Google sort of this way. Like people would be like, "How did you find out about that thing?" And the other person would be like, "I just Googled it." And they're like, "It knows that? How do you talk to it?" Are there lessons to be learned, or is this just too much of a leap ahead?
It's so hard because of course there are parallels, right? There are cycles, right? We've seen this movie before in some way, shape, or form, and we do periodically. Folks of a certain age may remember a time when everybody in every classroom was like, "You cannot use Wikipedia as a source," right? No cell phones. Maybe people are still doing that. I'm gonna get myself in trouble here. But no, I think there are history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes kind of scenarios, right? I do think that there are realistic differences. I think there are differences in kind in this particular moment, but there are resonances for sure, and I'm not sure that we're identifying the resonances that could probably help us deal with it this time around. How am I doing for time?
It's the end of the day. Just keep going.
I can go. Fantastic. Sunset is right.
I think technically you have till 5.
Till 5. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, please.
But as you said, you're dealing with rather special groups of people. It's
True.
academics,
Yes.
academia. They have a kind of basic ground education. They can probably form their thoughts.
That's
I'm dealing with mechanics at the workshop floor.
yes.
And then, the background can be very, very different.
Yes.
Some of them were gamers half of their life. Some of them are just, they don't know what browser is, though they are paying their bills or stuff like that.
Yeah. I think
So,
yeah.
you just can't define, or you can't talk about sociologics in general,
Right.
because the society is very stratified
Indeed.
and not saying segregated, of course.
Yeah, it's that is front and center in the sort of actual work, sort of the actual performance of the work, is understanding, what is, when a human person walks in the door to sit down with me,
Yeah.
who are they, right? The
Yeah.
particularity, right? To circle back to the concept from the keynote again, right? The particulars matter with human beings as much as with the technologies.
And I'm onboarding as well as mechanical engineers and programmers and personnel at the workshop. So what are you doing here is my first question.
Yes.
They are really surprised.
Yeah, no, because that puts the agency with them, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, rather than
Tell me.
yeah, what do you need? What can I do? Right? What is your question? What is the thing that you're looking for?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I know what they are, the company's basic needs.
Mhm.
I can define them. I define them.
Mhm.
What we want to have for the output.
Yeah.
But then as my aim is just to narrow the gap. Probably, I don't know from what direction or something.
Mhm.
But still.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons that I think that coming in from a humanities background and training, I've actually found a niche within the technology world that actually works with some of my training.
Yeah.
Which
And
is
then
great.
they say SolidWorks give me the error.
Yeah.
Well, what does it mean? I said, no idea.
Yeah.
But somebody wrote this program, like, I'm not saying up, for like 20, 30 years ago. It's just like the standard string you send to the user. Don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Well-written error messages. Oh my goodness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When did you see it last time?
Mhm.
Do you find that any of these assumptions are, greater or less in any particular demographics?
Let me think. I mean, honestly, the biggest variable that I encounter is probably age, within the scope of the clients that I see. Really good question. I think probably I would say the most variability that I see tends to be around comfort with inexplicability. I don't know if that's surprising or not, but I think it's true. I think that there are a lot of folks who are willing to take it as just sort of pragmatically the case that we've gotten the thing done that I needed done. I understand if this happens again, generally what I need to do. That's okay, fine. I don't. It wildly varies, but it does vary.
Do you find that there's maybe a correlation between the people who are willing to take that 30-year-old program that the developers moved on
Yeah.
through 5 different jobs since then, and who knows if we would be able to track them down? It's,
Yeah.
in my mind, I
know
could see
it.
the
Yes.
person saying,
Right.
"Oh, that it's so old we would never be able to tell you what it does," versus "It's so new we would never be able to tell you what it does."
Yeah, those are interesting bookends, aren't
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
So that's really interesting because I notice that the younger programmers that come in are often willing just to kind of whack at a problem until it works without really delving in and understanding, and that. Is it really a generational thing?
I hesitate to generalize to that degree.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I speaking again as somebody of my own generation, I learned about technology very much with a framework, with a theoretical framework, with a value framework, right? And it was very clear, as I was taught about computers, that computers were logical, they were reliable, you could clearly define every step, in principle at least, and that is what technology meant, right? And so, is it generational? Probably, in the sense that, folks within a particular generation probably learned stuff like that in the schools that they attended.
I think even the same person can have different, like within like what their mental state is at the same time. Because if you're just like trying to get something done and you're distracted or whatever, you're gonna maybe like cargo cult thing where you're like just doing something because you know it works. But sometimes they'll do that sometimes, and then eventually it'll be like, I'm gonna actually double check that I actually need to do this thing, because if I don't need to do this thing, that'll be great. And
Yeah.
get curious about like what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And some of that is just that curiosity.
The
You really wanna know
curiosity
what's
is
going
awesome.
on,
Yeah.
or just doesn't matter if it works.
And again, curiosity can be a luxury depending upon the person you're working with, right?
Exactly.
For sure.
That's someone who's older. I think that it's.
Define.
I find that there is generational things, but it's not a good or bad thing. It's just that our technology is way slower. So you would take the time to try to delve in and figure out what's going on, because you didn't have that opportunity to just try something out and just say, oh, that didn't work, and that didn't work, and that didn't work. So you could iterate a lot faster nowadays.
Sure.
So it's your technology is driving what you're able to do. And computers were a lot less forgiving back in the day. If you made a mistake, and I still have this with my parents when I'm dealing with their computer problems, they don't want to touch it. They're afraid I'm going to destroy something. I'm like, you are not. This thing is bulletproof now. You're thinking of our TRS-80. You know?
Yes. And speaking to you just remind me of something. Like another sort of social element is dedicated time and space versus ubiquity, right? I think that's huge, and I didn't touch that at all. But the fact that we're all walking around at all times, let's just be honest, with our devices and our apps, right? Instantaneous, quick, get the thing, boop, done, walking down the hallway. Rather than getting up on a Saturday morning, going, into the family room, plugging in the modem, that sort of social context makes a difference in the ways that we understand and relate to the technology, I think, too.
Doing it in front of everyone.
Yeah, the public nature of it, right? Yeah, please.
So it's curious if having these assumptions tested through exposure to generative AI has, either for you or for the academics you work with, has that changed your relationship with, like, let's call it deterministic technology?
Huh. Oh man, that one I am going to keep in the back. I'm gonna plug that in as a recurring event on my calendar so that I can check back in periodically and wrestle with that question over time. I think so far, has it made any difference to me? No, probably the only thing is just I think I'm starting to recognize in my own habits. I think my annoyance is accelerating at non-Gen AI, interactive non-Gen AI. My expectations are beginning to shift. The Overton window is shifting. And Gen AI is now cultivating more of an expectation in me that apps will be prompt, will be fluent. That's a big one, right? Will be more focused, right? The difference between, it's beat to death at this point, but Google searching and looking through a page of results and synthesizing versus asking the same question and getting a coherent paragraph back that is maybe reliable, probably mostly depending on the circumstances. So I think internally I'm recognizing a bit of a shift in my expectations. I don't know how far that's going to go.
You have to be able to make a quick evaluation, what is reliable, what is not reliable.
Yes, very much
Because,
so.
I mean, you can do it in mechanics.
Sure.
And there you don't have the luxury with trial and error. If you're like building a machine or making a fence for a robot, you just can't.
Yeah, my partner works at an engineering company and they do aerospace parts and there's a really different set of parameters
Exactly.
in play, right, with the work.
So I mean, just generate, like if you work as a translator or something, okay, it doesn't matter if the customer is not at the trial for economic crime or something. It doesn't matter.
Well, and I
You
think
can try if it works.
and this is important too, and
Exactly.
I haven't heard this conversation very much yet. Maybe I just haven't been paying attention in the right places. But the use of Gen AI in a context where you can iterate and tweak versus the use of the tool in a front-facing public context where there's the immediate need for something to happen.
Liability,
Exactly.
insurance,
Yeah.
There's also been a lot of
who's covering it?
over promising from technologies
Of course.
too. Like Lynn's saying that trials to just it's gonna you just need to stick this technology in here and you don't need people doing transcription or anything anymore and everything. But it's just like maybe it's sort of starting to get to the point now where you could have enough context to kind of do that. But it's just like even I don't know. It just But many years ago they're like, oh, just do this and it'll transcribe the sound and everything, but it'd be horrible, coming out. It's like.
Yes.
So
Minute left.
if I wasn't sure how much multimodal AIs are becoming more of a they're on the forefront. Let's say I wasn't sure how much experience you had with exposure to multimodal AIs, whether or not it just in the concept of we were talking about how do I talk to it.
Yeah.
And I feel like sort of the juncture of augmented realities, sort of like the virtual realities that we're getting, and multimodal AI, I think could become kind of an interesting cross section where it can help. I would think bridge that gap in terms of people being able to talk to it more, being able to interact with it, and just in seeing how sort of the stance has changed. Do you think that that's going to bridge the gap at all?
I do.
Make an impact, or if anything, it maybe create a larger gap in some
Yeah,
areas.
well, it probably both, but I definitely see the first possibility. The degree to which already like one of the fun things that we've been doing internally at work is take a photo of some piece of equipment and say, "What is this, ChatGPT?" Right? That sort of multimodal interaction is kind of an interesting approach to think about, right? And that definitely could have a use, right? That could find a niche. For tools that sort of specialize in that or whatever. But yeah, I think it's much bigger than that. And we're starting to scratch the surface, which is the exciting bit.
Well, and that was kind of interesting. Like one of the first usages for GPT-4V, the multimodal, was this app, Be My Eyes, where people that have vision issues
Accessibility,
and
yes.
stuff. And in that app, normally you would be like, well, I need to do something. So you have a video or picture type call with a real person that helps you out. But with this, you could use GPT at first to kind of like do that, and then if it couldn't figure it out, then you could call someone. So having to have less people for that. But there was demos of that, and it was pretty cool that you could just be like navigating through things just by snapping pictures and stuff.
Ethan Malik is somebody who's been writing a lot about genAI, specifically in academic circles. And I forget his phrase. He came up with a really cool sounding phrase. It was like genAI being better than GenAI doesn't have to be great, it just has to be better than the best available human in any given circumstance. And so thinking specifically, let's say, student on a college campus having some kind of, crisis in, 3 a.m. The student mental health center may not be staffed at that moment, right? And so could there be an app that gives that student some usefulness in terms of support for their mental health, talking them through some kind of crisis? Not that app needs to be as good as any therapist, right, or counselor, but there aren't any of those humans around at that moment, and so is that the niche for that tool? Fascinating stuff, lots more to come, but thanks for your time and your questions and your comments. I appreciate it.